seminar in this series is titled Appointment of Judges to Higher Judiciary in India, Contemporary Debates. The speaker today is Dr. P. Puneet. I have the pleasure of introducing my colleague here. Dr. P. Puneet is Associate Professor at CSLG JNU. He has done his BAL, LLB, LLM and PhD from Bangalore University, Karnataka. His teaching and research interests are in the areas of constitution and administrative law, judicial process, law and justice in globalizing world, and criminal law. His doctoral work was on the topic Impact of Global Regulatory Regime in the Indian Constitution, a critical study. Dr. Puneet is a regular contributor for the annual survey of Indian law and has also published papers in journals of international and national development. He has recently contributed to General Global Law Review, Delhi Law Review, Bangalore Law Journal and CNLU Law Journal. Before joining CSLG, he was serving at the Indian Law Institute since 2006 as Assistant Professor of Law. He has also served as a member of the Board of Studies and the Academic Council of ILI. He has also worked as Assistant Editor of the prestigious Journal of the Indian Law Institute. I invite Dr. Puneet to make his presentation.
Thank you, Lala, and a very warm good afternoon to all of you. Appointment of judges to higher judiciary is one of the most contentious issues in the country, which has generated widespread debates and vast literature too. This has been the subject matter of many judicial decisions and several law commission reports. National Commission to review the working of the Constitution, which was appointed by the earlier India regime, too had gone into this particular issue, and they in fact even drafted a constitutional amendment bill to amend the Constitution to change the existing system of appointment of judges, but somehow the bill has lapsed in 2003. And all these developments have also led to publication of a lot of academic and research works. This shows the amount of time spent debating this particular issue relating to the appointment of judges. Presently, this issue has once again caught the national attention owing to the establishment of National Judicial Appointment Commission to replace the existing collegium system. Many understands the importance of the issue, why this has received so much of attention. But few might wonder as to why issues relating to appointment of judges must be debated so widely and intensely. After all, judiciary was considered as one of the weakest organ of the state at one point in time. Montesquieu even went to the extent of describing the judiciary as next to nothing. He said of all three powers of the state, legislature, executive and the judiciary is next to nothing. So why should we discuss so much about this particular issue as to who appoints judges, who are appointed as judges and how are they appointed as judges? Let me begin by saying that India has one of the most powerful judiciary in the world. Though framers of the Constitution were very entrusting too much power to the judiciary, ultimately they ended up conferring on the judiciary the original appellate, advisory and review jurisdiction. It is so vast. And they have also armed the judiciary with the power to exercise the judicial review over legislative and executive actions and to declare them as void if at all they are found unconstitutional. But the framers of the Constitution in a way have well defined these jurisdictions so as to ensure that the exercise of judicial power does not constitute unreasonable interference with the functioning of the other two organs of the state. But over a period, if you see that the judiciary under the guise of judicial activism has expanded its power in a manner and to the extent which was only unimagined by the framers of the Constitution. And it has emerged as one of the most powerful judiciary in the world. It now claims that anything that is done in the purported exercise of the power conferred under the Constitution is subject to judicial review. and there is nothing that cannot be subjected to the judicial review. It has been long established that the judiciary now has the power to even review the constitutional amendments on the ground of doctrine of basic structure, which itself is a judicial innovation, and that in a way represents the highest benchmark of judicial activism in the country. At the time when it was invented, doctrine of basic structure, there were no parallel provisions in any part of the world, making the judiciary competent to review the constitutional amendment as well. This is what made Justice R.S. Pathak in one of the cases to say that the range of judicial power recognized in the superior judiciary of India is perhaps the widest and the most extensive known in the world of law. Today, judiciary not only adjudicates, particularly the Supreme Court, the disputes that come before them, it in a way has established its right to co-govern this country along with the other two organs of the state. It is taking active part in the formulation of policies as well as in the governance of the country. If one analyzes the extent of jurisdiction that the Supreme Court of India has, the kind of orders that it has passed in several cases, the directions that it has issued, you would definitely come to the conclusion that the judiciary is in fact governing this particular country as of now, along with the other two organs of the state. The judiciary has rejected the doctrine of political question and the doctrine of judicially manageable standards, saying that they don't have any application in India, which would in a way limit the judicial power. So looking at all these developments, one can realize that far from being next to nothing, which Montesquieu has said, judiciary in our country has emerged as one of the most powerful institutions, most powerful public institution. And it may be noted that the Supreme Court of India, which has so much of power, does not sit en banc. Not all the judges sitting together and deciding the cases, like in America. American Supreme Court sits en banc. But the Indian Supreme Court sits in benches, ordinarily consisting of two judges. Whatever power that I have described that the Indian Supreme Court has is actually being exercised by the judges, by the benches consisting of two judges, and in exceptional cases, the larger benches are constituted. So far, in the country, only twice the Supreme Court of India sat en banc. That is one in the case of Goloknath versus State of Punjab, that was in 1967, and again in the case of Keshavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala, that was in the year 1973. Otherwise, it is ordinarily the two judge benches which sit and exercise this vast power that is conferred on the Supreme Court. And these two judge benches have the power even to declare the law enacted by the state and the central legislation, the legislature, parliament, as unconstitutional. And some of the recent examples of where the two judge bench have struck down the law enacted by the parliament were the section 66A of the IT Act of 2000, where they struck down the two judge bench of the Supreme Court in the case of Shreya Singhal versus Union of India, has struck down this particular provision, thereby creating a large legislative vacuum. And another landmark decision passed in the recent day was Lily Thomas versus Union of India, where a particular provision in the Representation of People Act was struck down by the Supreme Court, which in a way has a far-reaching implications on our democratic polity itself. Who took the decision? It is only the two judge bench of the Supreme Court. And it is permissible under our constitutional scheme for the five judge bench of the Supreme Court to strike down even the constitutional amendment which is passed by two-thirds majority in both houses of parliament, and in some cases even ratified by more than half of the states in the country. There is so much power that the Supreme Court now exercises, the judges of the Supreme Court now exercises, but unfortunately not enough is known about the criteria that were used for the selection of these particular judges. And even the method of appointing these judges to the Supreme Court has always been very controversial. The debate over the issue of appointment of judges started in 1960s, and these debates have gained more momentum in the 1990s when they created a new system called the collegium system for the appointment of judges, replacing the one that is envisaged in the Constitution. If you look at the collegium system, one finds that it is not the system that is created in the Constitution. Perhaps the Constitution has created altogether a different system for the appointment of judges. And according to the original scheme envisaged in the Constitution, it is the President who is vested with the power to appoint judges, who is obliged to consult the judiciary, more particularly the Chief Justice of India, in making the appointment. And it is important to note that the Constitution obliges the President to consult the judicial members of the judiciary, and not to concur with their opinions. The idea of concurring with the opinion of the judiciary was mooted in the Constituent Assembly itself. There was an amendment moved to the draft constitution saying that the word consultation in the draft constitution shall be replaced by the word concurrence. But after a lengthy debate in the Constituent Assembly, that was rejected. So framers of the constitution very well knew the distinction between the expression consultation and the concurrence. And it is also evident from the fact that they used both these expressions in Article 370 of the Constitution, where in some cases they said that the President must consult the state government, Jammu and Kashmir, in certain respect, and in some cases they mandated that the President shall concur with them. They used these two expressions that clearly indicate that the framers of the Constitution were very well aware of distinction between consultation and the concurrence. But though the Constitution mandate was only to consult the judiciary, particularly the Chief Justice, somehow in the first decade of the working of our Constitution, from 1950 to 59, that the judiciary in almost all cases, one of the eminent jurists, Pauline Nariman, points out, that judiciary in almost all cases has concurred with the opinion of the President in almost all cases concurred with the opinion of the judiciary. There are no appointments made against the wishes of the judiciary. But somehow things have changed in 1960s, particularly because of the literal interpretation given by the judiciary to the provision relating to right to property under the Indian Constitution, whereby several high courts in the country and the Supreme Court struck down several land reform legislations enacted by the state legislatures. That is where they felt that almost all the judges, if one reads the article by Judge Gadabai's portrait of a Supreme Court judge, he says that almost all of them belong to the rich class. Even the legislature then started thinking that these judges have become property minded. We need forward-looking judges to the Supreme Court, thereby they meant that the judges whose ideologies are in sync with the ideologies of the government that are in place. That is where the whole debate started, and somehow because of this, that there have been discussions in the Parliament and outside the Parliament on these lines. Some of the judges have started leading for the executive, and also started demonstrating in their speeches and some of the judgments that they have written that how much forward-looking they are, as a result of which they fall in line with the executive, and that led to the prevalence of the executive compliance climate in the country. And the consultations that have taken place with the judiciary thereafter, after the 1960s, were definitely in accordance with the convention that existed in the first decade of the Indian Constitution. The expression consultation that is used in the provisions in Constitution relating to appointment of High Court and Supreme Court judges has been the subject matter of judicial interpretation in three main cases. They are known as the first, second and third judges cases. In the first case, it was argued that the expression consultation, at least in the context of appointment of judges to the judiciary, should be interpreted to mean concurrence, though no dictionary in the world defines the consultation to mean as concurrence. And one must also understand that when this contention was raised before the Supreme Court, that it is evident from the constitutional provision that this was not the idea, that they considered the idea of concurrence and rejected it in the Constituent Assembly. However, the Supreme Court has rightly rejected the contention in the first judge's case and said consultation means only consultation and not concurrence, and thereby said that the opinion of the Chief Justice of India is not binding on the government. That resulted in a way in upholding the executive primacy in the matter of appointment of judges. That has created further problems in the country. Executive in fact started asserting more, and sometimes there has been a delay in appointment of judges because of upholding of the executive primacy, in the sense that if at all any names are cleared by the state governments in appointing judges to the High Court, if there is a subsequent change in the government at the state level, they used to call back all the recommendations made earlier, saying that they would reconsider it again and send it back. and that resulted in long delay in making appointment to the judiciary. That has led to filing another public interest litigation in the Supreme Court called the Subhash Sharma versus Union of India, wherein the 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court considered the issues and they felt that for all the problem, it is the judicial interpretation of the word consultation to mean consultation only in the first judge's case is responsible. And they said, and I quote, "The purpose of consultation is to safeguard the independence of the judiciary and to ensure the selection of proper persons. The matter is not therefore to be considered that the final say is the exclusive prerogative of the executive government. The why constitution framers have provided for consultation is to uphold the independence of the judiciary. The moment you say executive shall have a primacy, then the judicial independence will be affected." Thereby they said that the earlier case, first judge's case, was a 7-judge bench decision, and the 3-judge bench said that it shall now be placed before a 9-judge bench of the Supreme Court to consider the matter, the correctness of the view expressed by the Supreme Court in the first judge's case. And it is in this case that the Supreme Court has created the collegium system. The time does not permit me to go into the details as to how the collegium system come to be created and what is the reasoning that the Supreme Court has assigned for the creation of the collegium system. But all that I would like to say at this stage is that the Supreme Court in conclusion in the 2nd judge's case said that the process of appointment of judges to the judiciary, both the High Court and the Supreme Court, must be an integrated participatory consultative process. Thereby they meant all constitutional functionaries who have a role in the process of appointment of judges shall participate in the process and try to reach consensus if possible. That's something that is ideal. But they said in case where there is no consensus that can be reached, then the opinion of the judiciary must prevail. The opinion of the judiciary symbolized in the view of the Chief Justice of India, which is formulated after taking into account the opinion of 2 other senior most judges of the Supreme Court, the opinion of the executive. But they also carefully added that this applies only in the matter of appointment but not non-appointment. That means to say, no appointment can be made against the wishes of the judiciary, these 3 members constituting the collegium of the judiciary. But the executive has a freedom to say no to the recommendation made by the judiciary. But somehow, the judges in the 2nd judge's case did not stop there. They said, in case the executive say no to any of the recommendation, they shall communicate the reasons for saying no to the judiciary, to these 3 collegium. And if these 3 members of the collegium, after considering the reason accorded by the executive, rejects them and reiterates the recommendation, then the 2nd judge's case say, as a matter of healthy convention, the executive shall be appointed. That means to say, the executive has no meaningful role in the process of appointment of the judges. At the most, they have authority to say no once but not twice. If the recommendation goes to them for the 2nd time, then they have no option but to make the appointment. The decision of the Supreme Court in the 2nd judge's case was criticized on several grounds. Apparently because it did not have any basis in the Constitution, because Constitution vested the power of appointment of the President, saying that he shall in consultation with such other judges of the Supreme Court and High Court make the appointment of the judiciary. However, consultation with Chief Justice in certain cases was mandatory. The choice as to whom the President shall consult was with the President. He could consult even the junior most judge of the Supreme Court or of any High Court if he thinks that it is appropriate to consult them. But through the collegium system, they said, no, you should only consult the 2 senior most plus the Chief Justice of India and no other judges. And not the President who would consult, it is the Chief Justice who would consult and inform the President. He shall have to put his seal and signature and issue the warrant of appointment. No more role for the executive as such. The scheme suggested by the Supreme Court in a way literally has the effect of amending the Constitution. By no stretch of imagination it can be considered as an interpretation of the Constitution. It is not even an interpolation, I must say, that it has the effect of virtually amending the Constitution. That is the reason why it was criticized widely by many scholars in India abroad, but somehow the government did not challenge the decision of the Supreme Court. It was only in the year 1998 when there was some deadlock over the appointment of some judges recommended by the then Chief Justice, Justice Punchi, that they made a precedential reference which came to be known as third judge's case to the Supreme Court. Under Article 143, President can make reference to the Supreme Court asking for its opinion. And there, in the third judge, the presidential reference, the Government of India has categorically said to the court that they are not actually seeking the review of the decision in the second judge's case. They are happy with whatever they have said earlier, but all that they want is few clarification on the law laid down by the Supreme Court in the second judge's case. This reference, Nariman calls it as one of the most fertile references made by the Government of India so far. And it is popularly known in the judicial circles as anti-Punchi reference, because Justice Punchi made 5 recommendations to the Government of India, of which because of certain right reasons, that the Government of India said that 3 names are okay, but we have reservation on 2 other names. Can we go ahead with making appointment of these 3 names, whereas rejecting the 2 other? But Justice Punchi said that either you may call 5 or none. So the government wanted to buy time so that Justice Punchi retires. Chief Justices generally have a short tenure. So they made this reference to the Supreme Court, formulating 8 or 9 questions asking for its opinion, which were otherwise obvious on reading of the second judge's case. There is no such confusion as such. But the Supreme Court in the third judge's case did not clarify the legal position that they have actually laid down in the second judge's case, but went beyond the points of reference and revised the collegium system to say that instead of 2 judges, you include 4 senior-most judges along with the Chief Justice, and the logic that greater the number, lesser will be the scope for arbitrariness and nothing more. This collegium system that come into existence through this process, which is the creation of the judiciary, has survived so far. It survived for more than 2 decades, though it does not have a textual basis in the Constitution. It has been criticized for lack of transparency. Even they don't entertain the RTA applications as to whose names are considered, whose names are accepted, and whose names are rejected. Nobody gets to know anything about it. It's criticized for nepotism, favoritism, and for limiting the scope of consultation which is contemplated under the original constitutional framework. It has in a way established the judicial primacy in the matter of appointment of judges, thereby completely tilting the constitutional balance. It was criticized even by Justice J.S. Verma, who is the creator of the collegium system. He was the author of the second judge's case. The majority opinion was written by Justice J.S. Verma, which resulted in creation of the collegium system. Later in life he said that judicial appointments have become judicial disappointments in the country. He regretted that. He said, I meant one thing but something else is happening in the collegium system. The lawyer who appeared in the second judge's case, Pauline Nariman, also very critical about the working of the collegium system. He said in his autobiography, he added a chapter in his autobiography titled A Case I Own but which I would prefer to have lost. That explains everything about the regrets that they have about what is happening under the collegium system. Even the Law Commission of India in its 2014 report, talking about the constitutional validity of the collegium system, clearly said that it is unconstitutional. Law Commission is headed by the judge of the Supreme Court, retired judge, clearly said it is unconstitutional and recommended to the government to seek the review of the first, second and the third judge decision of the Supreme Court. Somehow the government did not file the review petition thereafter, obviously because it was contemplating the setting up of the National Judicial Appointment Commission. But there was a public interest litigation filed in the year of 2010 by an NGO called the Suraj India Trust, wherein they questioned the constitutional validity of the collegium system. 2-judge bench of the Supreme Court considered the contentions raised by the Suraj India Trust and then felt that there is some merit in the case, but they recommended the case to be presented before the larger bench, as the earlier cases were decided by 7 or 9 judge bench of the Supreme Court, which resulted in creation of the collegium system. But when the matter went to the 3-judge bench, for the first time to my knowledge in the constitutional history, that the Supreme Court dismissed the petition on the ground that the Suraj India Trust lacks the locus standi. It is quite strange to me because, number one, that it is first time that after a reference has been made by the two-judge bench considering that there is a merit in the case to the larger bench goes back to the issue of locus standi and dismisses it. Second, if you look at almost all cases related to the judicial appointment, transfer and removal, almost all of them are public interest litigations. They did not enter into the issue of locus standi then. Now for the first time they felt that the Suraj India Trust does not have the locus standi to raise this issue before the Supreme Court, and the matter got dismissed also by the three-judge bench of the Supreme Court to a very cryptic order. So the Supreme Court thereby, by dismissing this particular case, has lost the last opportunity that they got to restore the constitutional balance which they themselves have tilted in the second and third judges case. They could have in a way restored the constitutional balance, but they lost the opportunity to do so. It is to restore this constitutional balance and to give a meaningful role for the executive in the matter of appointment of judges, which they had under the original constitutional scheme, that the constitutional amendment of 2014 was introduced in the Parliament to establish the National Judicial Appointment Commission, and they have been passed, as you all know, with overwhelming majority in Parliament and ratified by more than half of the states. But this move has generated a fresh round of debate over the topic, particularly in the courtroom, academic circles, as well as in the political precincts. The creation is completely clouded with the controversy. And it may be interesting to note that attempts were made to nip it in the bud itself, that when these bills were still under consideration before the Parliament and the state legislature, because this is an amendment that required the ratification by the state legislature, a case was filed in the Supreme Court challenging that Parliament shall be prevented from passing on this bill to the state legislature for their consideration. That is also first time that has happened in the constitutional history, where when the law before its actual enactment is challenged before the Supreme Court. Somehow the Supreme Court has rejected it on the ground that the petition is premature, but soon after they were enacted into law, they were challenged again in the Supreme Court on the ground that the NJAC, National Judicial Appointment Commission, affects the independence of judiciary, which is one of the inviolable basic features of the Constitution of India. And the decision thereon is still awaited. NJAC is not yet being made functional, and this institutional deadlock in a way has created a constitutional crisis as of now. The crisis is, as on today when we are speaking, there is no functional system of appointment of judges in place in the country now. The collegium system, which was functional so far, was replaced on the very day when these two constitutional amendment and the NJAC Act were notified for operation. But after they were notified for operation, Chief Justice of India refused to take part in the NJAC, saying that till the case gets disposed of by the Supreme Court, I am not going to take part. So there is no functional system of appointment of judges in places. And it is criticized for the purpose that it violates the basic feature of the Constitution. This is what is being debated as of now, as to how does it violate the basic feature of the Constitution, in which case the NJAC can be struck down by the five-judge bench which is presently here in the matter. If you look at the composition of the NJAC, it is a 6-member commission, of whom 3 members come from the judiciary. It is headed by the Chief Justice of India, who is an ex officio chairperson of the National Judicial Appointment Commission. And there are 2 ex officio members, they are the senior-most judges of the Supreme Court. And in addition to these 3 judicial members, there is 1 executive member who is the incumbent Union Minister for Law and Justice, that is also ex officio position. All the 4 are ex officio positions. And there are 2 other positions reserved for eminent persons. And these eminent persons, according to the scheme, are to be selected by a collegium consisting of the Prime Minister of India, Chief Justice of India, and the Leader of Opposition, 2 politicians and a judicial member. If you look at this composition, you realize that the substantial representation is given to the judiciary because of the 6 members, 3 come from the judiciary, and the judiciary has a role in selecting the other 2 as well. And how does this NJAC is expected to make decision as to the appointment of judges? The NJAC Act provides for the details therein, and it says that the commission shall not recommend a person for appointment if any 2 members of the committee do not agree for such recommendation of the 6-member committee. If any 2 members say that no appointment shall be made, appointment of a particular person shall not be made, then no appointment can be made, no recommendation can be made. It has to be for the purpose of appointment. That means the 1 person can be a dissent in the commission, but 2 persons can veto down any proposal, and the judiciary has 3 persons. And it is important to note that how this system that is brought into existence to replace the collegium system violates the basic structure doctrine. The petition is pending before the Supreme Court, and I had an opportunity to go through the contentions that have been raised in the petition, and also to read about the proceedings that are happening in the Supreme Court, the various arguments that are raised through newspaper articles and through friends. What I gather is that there are 4 main arguments against the National Judicial Appointment Commission. Number 1 is that they say the National Judicial Appointment Commission denies primacy to the collective opinion of the judiciary. They are trying to say that even if all 3 members of the judiciary who are part of the National Judicial Appointment Commission collectively decide that a particular person shall be appointed, that they will not be able to push his name, because any other 2 members can veto down the recommendation. Earlier under the collegium system, it could happen. As I said, that once the executive could say no, but not twice. Second time they had to make the appointment mandatory. But as far as the question of according primacy to the judiciary is concerned, can it be considered as something that affects the basic structure of the Constitution? The doctrine of basic structure itself is based on the structural interpretation of the original Constitution. That means to say, the basis for the basic structure doctrine is the original Constitution. By original Constitution, I mean the Constitution that was adopted on November 26, 1949, before the First Amendment. That is the original. That is the basis for deciding the basic structure. And if one goes through the Constituent Assembly debates, they even rejected the idea of concurrence with the opinion of the judiciary, and the question of giving primacy to the judicial opinion does not arise at all. The idea of judicial primacy is not supported by the text or the context of the Constituent Assembly. They rejected this particular idea. And in fact, if you go through the text of the Constitution in the light of Constituent Assembly debates to construct it, you realize that perhaps according primacy to the judicial opinion would tilt the constitutional balance, and perhaps that would affect the basic structure doctrine. The collegium system, when it was brought into existence, we tilted the basic structure, we tilted the constitutional balance, in fact affected the basic structure doctrine. The idea of primacy was an idea that was never entertained by the framers of the Constitution. It has no basis in the constitutional text. Then how can it be said that mere denial of primacy to the opinion of the judiciary would amount to violation of basic structure doctrine? I don't think this argument is well founded. And even if you look at the NJAC, it is a broad-based commission representing various interests. It undoubtedly restores the constitutional balance. Judiciary has a substantive representation in it. As I said, out of the 6-member commission, 3 are from the judiciary, and no appointment can be made without the concurrence of at least 2 members of the judiciary under the collegium system. At least of the 3 members, 2 must agree with the view of the other 3 so that the appointment can be made. And it is even difficult for the executive to appoint any one of their choice unless they get the support of 2 judicial members. Even if it is to be assumed that the 2 eminent persons are almost always going to be in agreement with the executive, the viewpoint of the executive, but which assumption itself is questionable in a way, because in appointing those 2 members, even the judiciary has a role. How can we readily assume that the 2 eminent persons are going to be in agreement almost always with the opinion of the executive? And since the executive has only one representation, it cannot actually effectively stall any appointment of the judiciary if the judiciary could gather the support of the other two members of the National Judicial Appointment Commission. AAC is coming to existence. Is their unbridled power to appoint or not to appoint anyone of their choice. Because no appointment can be made against their wishes, but just because only they wanted to appoint someone, they cannot appoint, which they can actually do it under the present collegium system. Otherwise, if you look at the whole scenario, we still find that the judiciary has a primacy in the matter of appointment of judges. The only thing that they are going to lose is that if any two members of the collegium of the NJAC say that no appointment can be made, then they cannot make the appointment, which power they enjoyed under the collegium system. So I don't think that the first argument against the National Judicial Appointment Commission holds water. Second important aspect is about appointment of eminent person. It is for the first time that in any legislation relating to the judiciary that they are trying to include eminent persons as part of any of the body that is constituted for the purpose. All this while, the expression that they used to use was eminent jurist, not eminent person. Eminent person is a wider expression than eminent jurist. If you look at the National Judicial Inquiry Act, there the eminent jurist has been made part of the inquiry committee to be constituted under the Judges Inquiry Act. And even the subsequent Judicial Standard and Accountability Bill of 2010, which also lapsed perhaps, which was proposed to replace this Judicial Inquiry Act, also has made the eminent jurist to be a part of the inquiry committee, not eminent person. And one of the recent legislation relating to Lokpal and the Lokayukta Act of 2013 includes eminent jurists to be a part of the Lokpal selection committee, selection of members of the Lokpal and chairman of the Lokpal. Perhaps it would have been better to have eminent person in the Lokpal Act and eminent jurist in the NJAC Act. But somehow they have not made this particular change. Obviously, because of the reason that increasingly the government is finding it difficult to find an eminent jurist in the country, though eminent jurist could be appointed as a judge of the Supreme Court, so far no appointment has been made. But they have found some of the eminent jurists for some of the purposes, like when the Judges Inquiry Act required an eminent jurist to be a part of it, or one of the former Vice Chancellor of a national law school was appointed. So, Constitution uses the word distinguished jurist, and here the legislation used eminent jurist. They could find an eminent jurist who is not distinguished enough to be appointed to the Supreme Court. And what is the problem with this eminent person is that, unfortunately in India, almost every politician and anyone who is close to them are all considered eminent persons. And it was even argued in the Supreme Court, in this present case which is pending by one of the counsel, that almost all 2G accused before they were arrested were all eminent persons. So anybody could be appointed to the National Judicial Appointment Commission. And the appointment as eminent person is to be made by this 3-member collegium, not by consensus. That means to say, two who are politicians, Prime Minister and the leader of opposition, can collide and overrule the Chief Justice in this matter, who is also a part of this collegium for appointing this eminent person. To some extent, this apprehension appears to be well founded, and there needs to be some change as regards appointing of eminent persons. It would be perhaps very ideal to replace the expression eminent persons with eminent jurists, but if that is not going to happen, to address this apprehension that the members of judiciary had, it is better to give a veto power to the Chief Justice of India as far as appointment of eminent persons are concerned. And merely giving a veto power to the Chief Justice of India will not be sufficient. There shall be two more provisions that is made. One, whoever is appointed as eminent person to the NJAC shall be disqualified from any future appointment under the state or under the center. Second, 3, that they should be debarred from practicing before the High Court and the Supreme Court, because they can't take part in the appointment of judges and again appear before them. That is also my concern. So these are some of the changes that needs to be made as far as the existing NJAC is concerned. The third important argument against the NJAC is that the newly inserted Article 124C of the Constitution confers very wide power on the Parliament to enact a law, to lay down the procedure and the criteria that is to be followed by the NJAC. And this procedure is laid down under the NJAC Act, which says that 2 judges can veto down and 1 can be a dissent in making the recommendation to the President for appointing a judge. Their apprehension is that it is possible to easily amend an ordinary legislation and replace the expression 2 members by 1 member, thereby virtually transferring the appointment power to the executive. How far this argument is well founded is a question. And their further argument is that if there is a subsequent change to this ordinary legislation cannot be questioned on the ground of violation of basic structure. It is only the constitutional amendment that can be questioned. But this argument itself is not well founded, because there are contrary views to this, that even the ordinary legislations can be questioned. We have given an example that even the Executive Act has been subjected to the judicial review on the ground of basic structure in S.R. Bomai's case. Then why not the ordinary legislation? Number 2, even if the subsequent amendment takes place and the expression 2 members is replaced by 1 member, does it virtually transfer the appointment power from the judiciary to the executive? At the most, the executive has only 1 member in the judiciary. The judiciary has 3 members. Executive will not be able to appoint any person of their choice unless they get the support of the others. So, even that argument also is somewhat baseless. But if at all there are any concerns, then there needs to be some safeguards as to how a change to this particular legislation enacted under Article 124C can be made. Perhaps they can make a provision which is exception, that any amendment to this ordinary legislation cannot be made unless there is a 2/3 majority in both houses of Parliament. That would be an effective safeguard for any kind of possible abuse of the power by the Parliament under Article 124C of the Constitution. And the fourth important argument that they raise is no explanation as to why the recommendation of the NCRWC is accepted and followed. The National Commission to Review the Working of the Constitution, which was appointed during the earlier India regime, I said, had also gone into this issue, and they also recommended for the replacement of the collegium system. And they also recommended for the establishment of the National Judicial Appointment Commission. But the composition that they recommended was slightly different than the composition that the present Act provides for. According to that the Appointment Commission shall be headed by a Chief Justice, 2 senior most judges as members, Law Minister, but only changes that in place of 2 eminent persons, 1 eminent jurist will provide for. That means to say that it is a 5-member committee with a pre-eminent role for the judiciary, which consists of 3 members in the 5-member committee. And the decision is to be made on the basis of majority. That means to say, whether appointment or non-appointment, the judicial member, if at all they join together, they can decide anything, thereby making the participation of the other 2 members, executive member and the eminent jurist, as meaningless. All that is happening under the collegium system is also the same. If you follow the recommendation of the Venkatachalaya Commission, this particular commission was headed by Justice Venkatachalaya, then all that it would lead to is like a old wine in a new bottle with certain changes which are totally insignificant. They don't make any meaningful changes. Number 2, that can it be a ground for judicial review? Whether a composition of the committee shall be of this form or a different one is a matter of policy. And it is well understood that the policy decisions are outside the purview of judicial review, not the entire policy. The question of choice of policy is outside the purview of judicial decision. All that the judiciary can do is to examine whether the policy that is chosen, there are multiple ways of addressing this particular problem, and the legislatures in their wisdom decide on one particular thing. All that the judiciary can see is that whether the particular form that they have chosen is constitutionally valid or not. legislature can never be asked to explain before the court as to why the other forms are not chosen. The choice of policy is outside the domain of the judiciary. But the constitutional validity of the policy which is chosen can be subject to judicial review. These are the four main contentions that were raised. And we also hear about one another important aspect which is also against the National Judicial Appointment Commission Act of 2014, that it for the first time said that the Commission shall recommend a senior most judge of the Supreme Court to be appointed as a Chief Justice if he is considered fit to hold the office. So far, the Constitutional Convention has been appointing the senior most judge of the Supreme Court as a Chief Justice of India on the incumbent being Nicholas Thakur. But it is not a constitutional mandate. Constitution does not say the senior most judge of the Supreme Court shall be appointed as a Chief Justice of India. It has been the Constitutional Convention which is being followed, and only twice that this rule has not been followed, both during the emergency. Once when the famous fundamental right case went before the Supreme Court, ADM Jabalpur versus Shrikanth Shukla, where during emergency many political activists were detained and they challenged the preventive detention before the court on the ground that it violates Article 21, and that was during the period of emergency when Article 21 was suspended. And then they said, the majority in the Supreme Court said that Article 21 is a sole repository of right to life. Since it is suspended, you cannot come before us. Executive has a right to violate your right to life is valid. But one of the judges, Justice Khanna, has dissented, saying that Article 21 cannot be a sole repository of right to life. It is something that is inherent. Even in the absence of it, you cannot easily take away this particular right. When Justice Khanna was the senior most judge, he was superseded because it was dissenting. And the second time the supersession was taken, perhaps that was the first time, this is the second time, was the same famous Keshwananda Bharti case, where three of the judges formed the majority which denied the Parliament to have an unlimited power to amend the Constitution. That is Justice Grover, Justice Selath and Justice Hegde. When Justice Sikri retired, all the three of them were superseded, and the fourth one in the order of seniority was appointed as a Chief Justice. And these two times, the supersession have taken place for a wrong reason, and they have been politically motivated. Otherwise, appointing the senior most judge as Chief Justice of India is not the constitutional mandate. But since these two supersessions have taken place for wrong reasons, there has been so much of criticism against the supersession, and subsequently almost all appointments were made only on the basis of seniority, even when the person to be appointed as a Chief Justice is to have only 15 days or 20 days to retire, he is appointed as a Chief Justice. That's a matter of rule. That even before the oath-taking ceremony of the Chief Justice actually gets over and the pendal gets removed, there is one more person to be appointed as a Chief Justice. There have been many Chief Justices in this country who have been appointed for very short tenure, like 15 days, 28 days, 40 days. But this convention is being followed. But the present act says that the senior most considered to be fit to hold the office shall be appointed. They say this would give scope for executive manipulations. But this provision is not something that is entirely new. Even in the second judge's case, the Supreme Court Advocate on Record Association versus Union of India, the majority said, while talking about the appointment of Chief Justice, I exactly quote the words, that appointment of the office of Chief Justice of India should be of the senior most judge of the Supreme Court considered fit to hold the office. When they said it, that was right. When the legislature repeated it, it would give scope for abuse by the executive. This is also somewhat difficult to understand. So, looking into these issues that have been raised against the National Judicial Appointment Commission, I find that by and large that this is a good system. It does not violate the basic structure of the Constitution in any manner. However, there are few apprehensions that are raised that need to be addressed relating to appointment of eminent persons and the possible abuse of the Article 124C of the Constitution by the Parliament. But looking back at the whole debates and discourses on the topic, that has so far taken place from 1960 to till date, one realizes that unfortunately, so far the debate predominantly has been on who should have the power to appoint judges and not on who should be appointed as a judge and how he or she should be appointed as a judge. Many of the core issues such as the qualities and level of competence of a person to be appointed as a judge, his or her values, views and convictions and their consonance with the constitutional principles, need for ensuring diversity among the judges, which may be necessary to improve public trust and confidence in the judicial system, and not received the adequate attention. Even the criteria that were followed to select the judges are also not well articulated. As far as the Constitution is concerned, it only lays down some threshold criteria, qualifications for the purpose of appointment as a judge. It says, as far as the Supreme Court of India is concerned, that a person who is a citizen of India, having been an advocate of the High Court for not less than 5 years, or a practicing advocate before the High Court for 10 years, or a distinguished jurist in the opinion of the President of India can be appointed as a judge of the Supreme Court. There are 3 feeder classes from where the persons for appointment to the Supreme Court can be considered. These are just threshold qualifications, and thousands of Indian citizens possess them. There are many practicing advocates. There are many, almost 800 High Court judges, of whom more than 500 you find have more than 5-year experience. And distinguished jurists, is difficult to say whether they are there in India or not. Law Commission, in its 14th report, the very first Law Commission has said that in India we do not have a jurist of that kind who can be considered to be appointed to the Supreme Court. So we can't say anything about it. And if you look at the appointments that have been made to the Supreme Court of India, from 1950 to till date, you find that 97.9% of the judges, it's the exact figure from 1950 to 2011, there was a recent literature on this, were appointed from the first category. The judges of the Supreme High Court having 5-year experience. That is one of the 3 feeder classes, and 97.9% have been appointed from that category. And so far only 6 persons were directly appointed to the Supreme Court from the bar. Considering the appointments that are made in 2014, 2 advocates have been appointed as judges of the Supreme Court. Only 6 members have been appointed from the second category and none from the third category. This is also another important matter to be considered, but unfortunately not much attention is paid towards this particular aspect as well. And one of the recently published book by Abhinav Chandrachud, which is a research work that he has carried out for his JSN degree program in the Stanford Law School, has said in addition to these 3 threshold criteria, that the judiciary in a way has evolved 3 informal criteria to be followed for the purpose of appointment of judges. What are these 3 informal criteria that are evolved? One is, there are criteria that a person who is less than 55 years of age shall not be appointed as a Supreme Court judge. And you know that in Supreme Court, judges retire at the age of 65. At the most, they should have a maximum of 10-year tenure, not more than that. So, as a matter of rule, it is followed that even if he has a seniority in the state, even if he is a distinguished judge or a distinguished lawyer, he shall not be appointed unless he has attained the age of 55 years. But if you look at the original constitutional scheme, you look at the lawyer with a 10-year practice can be appointed. That means if a person completes LLB at the age of 22 years, at the age of 32 can be appointed to the Supreme Court so that he can have a long tenure. There will be consistency in the judicial policy as well. But they have a policy of appointing judge only when he has attained the age of 55 years. That is one informal criteria that is. Second informal criteria is seniority. It comes in the context of appointing judges from the first category of sitting High Court judges. And since majority of the judges come from there, this is also an important criteria. They say, Constitution says that a sitting High Court judge with 5-year experience can be appointed. And substantial demographic representation is also another important issue that has not been given due weightage, though they try to give a symbolic representation to the weaker sections as well as for women. So, looking at all these things, there is urgent need to perhaps focus more on these issues than on the power of appointment of judges. Who has to have the power of appointment of judges and what procedure are to be followed? We have debated it enough and more for the last 60 plus years. Now at least it is time that we should sit down to focus from thinking about who has to have the power, to whom has to be appointed as a judge, and how they are to be appointed as a judge. And there is urgent need to articulate the criteria that need to be followed in appointment of the judges. So if there is clarity on this particular issue, perhaps that restricts the arbitrariness on the part of whoever is going to have the power to appoint the judges. That is the most important concern, where we find that some of the contemporary debates are not focusing on this. We are actually discussing the issues which are not so significant. As far as the NJSC is concerned, as I said, it does not violate the independence of judiciary. But in conclusion, I would like to say, of course, there is no guarantee that it absolutely works well. We must be mindful that no system works on its own. It is the individuals involved who are to make it work well. It depends to a major extent on the personalities of those who are involved in the process of appointment. Let us not be carried away by the worst hearsay that office sanctifies the holder of it and think that persons appointed as judges become trustworthy on such appointment, and thus they shall be vested with the power to appoint other judges. We have seen two systems of appointment of judges so far, one that worked till 1992, where the executive had the primacy, and the other system that came into existence in 1992 and worked so far, where the judiciary has the primacy. And we have realized that nothing has worked well. Let us give a chance for the NJSC without nipping it in the bud. With this I conclude, and I look forward for your comments and questions.